So whilst we're waiting for a few of the others to come down, who here is having their first year at FOSS Talk Live? Hands up. It's a warm, safe place. Wow. Look at all you new people. This is brilliant. Okay, and of you newbies...
Right, everyone introduce yourself. No, I won't do that.
Who here is unfamiliar with the Ubuntu podcast?
Hey, that's pretty good.
Put your hand down. Wow, okay.
You've presented it.
Wow, really? That's a first, I think. It's the first time we've had an audience that actually knows what this is all about. So, kind of redundant, but we'll go through it anyway. I'm Martin. I'm one of the presenters of the Ubuntu podcast. Mark appeals to our younger demographic.
I'm not sure how.
And also keeps Alan and I. Alan is the handsome fellow on the end here.
Hello.
Keeps Alan and I in check because we are the shills of the Ubuntu podcast, given that we both actually work for Canonical. Although we didn't plan it quite like that, it just kind of worked out that way.
10 years.
It's a very good way to get a job at Canonical, it turns out.
So at this point, we'd like to extend our thanks, as usual, to Late Night Linux for being our warm-up act. I think they did a modest job this year. Ended on a bit of a downer. We've got to do a bit more work to lift you all up and get smiles on faces. But welcome. Come on down. Seats at the front.
Maybe you'll know when it starts.
Yeah. Usually,
you'll get flashbacks to 1927.
For those of you who've heard the Ubuntu podcast before, you'll know that when we record, we have a silent presenter who's called Samantha, and she plays in our stings. Unfortunately, Samantha can't be with us this evening, so Joe Ressington will be playing the part of Samantha tonight. So a big hand for Joe Ressington in the corner, who's going to be a stand-in Samantha. So when you see us nod, obviously at Joe, that's Joe being cued to playing the stings. Yep,
a bit.
So Mark,
So if you like what you see and you want to share it with the world, please take photos, post them on Twitter, use the FOSS Talk hashtag, tag at Ubuntu Podcast, and you can post photos to the Ubuntu Podcast Telegram channel, which we have at ubuntupodcast.org/Telegram.
Yeah.
The other thing that I need to say is that normally when we start doing the show, we count 1, 2, 3, and then we all say biscuits together, which allows us to sync up our audio. Now, unfortunately, we didn't bring biscuits tonight, so I'm sorry, but so what we're going to do is I'm going to say 1, 2, 3, and then we're all going to say no biscuits. So can we do that? 1, 2, 3, no biscuits.
Very good. Very good.
Are we in sync now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Perfectly.
Okay. And then what we also need to do is insert a small ripple of applause into the show in a very BBC British way. So I would really like to call for you now to do a small ripple of applause, and then Joe will play us in, please.
Hello and welcome to the Ubuntu podcast at FOSS Talk Live. My name's Mark, and joining me this week are Martin.
Hello.
And Alan.
Hello, you.
Martin, what have you been up to since the last time we spoke?
Well, I have just arrived back from Prague, where I have been attending the Electron Maintainers Summit at the Microsoft offices in Prague, hosted by GitHub.
Well, that didn't take long, did it?
So what happens at an Electron Maintainers Summit?
It's the place where about 50 or 60 people get together and decide the direction of Electron as a technology platform.
Do they also have people from major memory manufacturers and CPU vendors there?
Yes, we did get a tote bag with 16 gigabytes of memory.
Nice.
Yeah, it was a good event, actually. So I learned quite a lot at that event, and it was an interesting conversation. So you'll be pleased to hear some of the topics of discussion were how to make Electron smaller, how to make it less CPU intensive, how to reduce its memory footprint. So encouragement to all of you that the Electron maintainers are in fact aware. They're not oblivious to the fact that Electron is a big fat CPU RAM hog, and they want to do something about that.
Great. How was Prague?
It's delightful. They have good beer in Prague.
Oh, I went-
and it was remarkably hot as well. It was
Yes.
like being on holiday.
I went to Prague on a business studies trip when I was at college, and we went on a brewery tour.
Right, yes. I did a couple of those.
Yes, fantastic. Alan,
Thank you, Microsoft.
Yes, yeah.
what have you been up to, Alan?
So I spent the week in the office.
Oh, wow.
Which is really unusual for me because, as those of you who listen to the show know, I work from home and it's very unusual for me to go in the office. But this week we had a design sprint, and it was really interesting for me because I've never sat in on a design sprint. We were doing some.
Do they normally lock the door and not let you come in?
Well, I don't have a Mac, so
And they
no.
When we
No,
walk in,
you
they
do
hide the
have a
crayon.
Mac.
Well, for the purposes of humour, let's say we don't. So we went into this design sprint, and I had no idea what was going on. And the plan was for us to create some mock-up designs for a popular application on the Linux desktop, GNOME Software Center. The thing where people download applications. So we were going to do some mock-ups for GNOME software, and it was impressive. I had no idea what goes on when you design an application, having never designed an application. And it was a really cool process of iterating over stuff that a whole bunch of us had, whiteboards on the wall, post-it notes, stickers and stuff, trying to figure out what the best all of us could come up with. Like, everyone was coming up with different ideas of how to present applications in an app store, and it turns out we came up with some good ideas. Cool. So maybe that will feature on a desktop near you soon.
Can you give us a sneak preview of what's coming in GNOME software?
Not really. No, it's not up to me. We came up with all the design stuff, but it's up to the maintainers of GNOME software to decide whether they accept those designs and whether they want to implement them.
Cool.
But, it was quite cool being in part of a design for an application that lots and lots and lots of people use. Yeah, it's pretty cool. What about you? What have you been up to?
I've been fixing my toilet.
Oh, the saga continues.
So this was the final thing in my bathroom, which was still leaking very
The
slightly.
final thing. I would think the toilet's the first thing you do, isn't it?
It was the final thing that was still leaking.
All right, okay.
Everything else was fixed, but the toilet. And in fact, no, the toilet
you
is the last
left
thing.
the
toilet
toilet
is,
leaking.
I had a tray under it. It wasn't
Was it, like,
leaking. It
jacked
wasn't
up?
leaking when we put it
No,
in.
Mark-
We discovered the leak a few days after we thought it was okay, and then it
Right.
turned out it was leaking, and so now we fixed the leak, and everything is watertight, and I can finish my bathroom.
Right. Mark reliably informs me he's going to be giving a presentation at OggCamp this year to retell the saga of how you fix your bathroom like a programmer.
Yes.
Wow.
So look forward to that.
Yeah.
Shall we get on with the news?
Let's do that.
Oh, it's me. And so it's time for the news. Now, the news is very depressing at the moment. So we thought, rather than look at all the horrible, depressing news there is at the moment, we'd go back in time. So step into our time trumpet and we'll go...
Well done, everyone.
Yes.
On message. Brilliant.
I didn't even have to ask for that. Everyone was time trumpeting away. Martin, what's first in our Back to the Future news?
Well, I'm going to take you back to 1978, so 40 years ago, when the CPU wars were just getting underway.
It's before you were born, Mark.
Yeah.
Was it? Thanks for that.
And it's the 40th anniversary of the original Intel 8086 processor.
Wow, I feel really old now.
Yeah, well, I was surprised to learn this, right? Because I got my first 8086 computer in like 1988, which is 10 years after the CPU came to market. So
Right.
when
that's about the same as me.
Really?
My first 8086 PC was an Epson computer.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And it was one of these ones that had a turbo button. So
course it did.
it was you could.
Did you
press
tape it down?
No, the turbo button was to slow it down. To
Obviously.
the whole point of the turbo button was to slow it down to 4.77 megahertz, so that applications that expected to be running at 4.77 megahertz would not just like. So when you're playing a game, the aliens wouldn't fly around at ridiculous speed. It would because games were hardwired for that speed.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So, Mark,
Happy
I'm
days.
going to take an educated guess that you were not an early adopter of the 8086 processor. When did you get on board with Intel PCs?
I think my family's first Intel computer was a Pentium 166 MMX in
Wow.
running Windows 95.
I was already working.
We had an Amiga before that.
I was already at work at that point. So
It's depressing doing a show with you. Really.
the 8086 name comes from the fact that it was 8 16-bit registers.
I don't believe you. I saw this written down,
Yeah.
and I think you made this up.
No, I didn't make it up. I double-checked my
Yeah,
facts
but then
and
you
everything.
also wrote something about what other series? 8008, 8080, and 8085.
Yep.
Does that mean there were 8 5-bit registers? Is that
No,
what that means? What's Intel's nomenclature for their CPUs? It's ludicrous.
Well, it still is today, right? Because what's the name of your processor in your computer today? It's something like an 8087K or something, right?
Yeah, all right.
Yeah,
allow
but this was cited to the designer of the processor, so I'm happy to say that this is fact.
It was on Wikipedia. It must.
No.
be.
He was interviewed about this, and this comes from the interview that he did. And this 8086, the original version, could address 1 megabyte of RAM. And
I remember it well.
Was
DOS
5
equals high, UMB.
Yeah,
Oh.
and was 5 megahertz, and then in latter years, uprated to 10 megahertz. So this is where the turbo button came from. And the one that I had was a 10 megahertz, and also featured the same turbo button to slow it down.
So I noticed you mentioned in here that the Intel was the 8086 was to compete with the Zilog Z80, which is very popular in the 8-bit era.
not the bloody Zilog Z80.
I know, right?
Sorry,
Which is
Mark.
still around now.
Yeah.
People still use the Z80. It's still manufactured now.
But so it was.
They haven't got a Zilog Pentium version.
So
They've still stuck with the Z80.
But the fascinating thing about the 8086 is it was intended to be a short-term SKU. It was never intended to be a long-term product. It was designed to compete with the Zilog Z80 and the Motorola processors while they were working on a new CPU architecture. And 40 years later, it's evolved and evolved and evolved. And Intel have dumped billions of dollars, and they've tried 3 times to actually replace the 8086 architecture with what did I find here? It was
the Itanium and
the Itanium,
IA-32.
the IAPX 432, which was apparently the thing that they were waiting to come to market whilst they put out this interim 8086 processor.
The other thing that fascinates me is that my neighbour wanted to buy a new computer, a laptop for some work stuff. He just wanted to create presentations. And he said, should I buy a Windows one? Or I've heard about these Chromebook things. And he said, can you come to the shop with me? And we walked around all the laptop aisles. You know what it's like, where they're all out. And there was a guy from Google there. And he said, you need to come along because I don't think he knows everything. And I asked just simple stuff like, how much RAM does this laptop have? And the guy went, I don't know. They don't tell us that. Which I thought was ludicrous. But they don't really make it clear which of the Chromebooks have Intel x86 based CPUs and which ones have ARM CPUs. You have to kind of dig a little bit. So a normal person is now getting away from that whole dung, CPU stuff, and it's just a laptop. It's just a Chromebook, and I don't care what the silicon in the middle of the thing is.
The hardware is an irrelevant thing. It's the Chrome experience that you're being sold. Fascinating.
So did they win?
So, some would say so. But in the meantime, marching forward a couple of decades, what's happening in the news?
So I found this. So yours was 40 years ago? I found this piece of news from 20 years ago, and it was a post on Slashdot, which still exists. I know. And it was a post by Bruce Perens, who wrote an article because there was a big brouhaha about the licensing under which Qt was made available. And the KDE desktop was in its infancy in those days, and Qt was made available under a not particularly free software friendly license. And the KDE desktop developers chose Qt, and there was a big brouhaha. And Linus Torvalds was quoted as saying, "He who writes the code gets to choose the license, and nobody else gets to complain."
And there was a herald of angels behind him as he said it.
Bruce didn't like that. Bruce wrote a lengthy article about why we should boycott KDE, and it's a terrible thing that KDE should become the default desktop, because they want it to become the default desktop on Linux. And that thread, hundreds and hundreds of comments, killed the Slashdot server because of all the neckbeards arguing about which was better. No more KDE.
They weren't neckbeards then. It was more bum fluff back then.
Right, of course. But it struck me that 20 years ago we were having this conversation.
Yeah.
And now there's still people arguing about which is better. But you know what? It's not the developers. It's not the developers that are arguing this. Like, we talk to GNOME developers all the time. We talk to KDE developers all the time. They are the loveliest people you would ever meet. It's the users. And like, people out there, as the internet's John O'Bacon would call them, the peanut gallery, who have an opinion and want to share that reckon with the world.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, they've been doing it for years and years and years, and now they have a very wide platform. In the past, 20 years ago, it was Slashdot. Nobody ever saw it. And now it's Twitter and so
exactly.
on.
But this particular argument, I think, really stunted the adoption of KDE for decades. In fact, 2 decades, maybe 15 years, because this whole licensing thing around KDE was one of the reasons why people chose what desktop they were running. It was around the perceived freedom of the toolkit and the desktop. And I think this really hurt KDE, even though this license issue was quite short-lived, because a version of Qt was made available under a free license.
But it wasn't properly free for a good long time.
Until just a few years ago. And now we're sitting in a world where KDE is really in the ascendancy, because Qt now is under a properly free, all of Qt is under a properly free license.
And at the time, there were quotes in the article from people such as Miguel de Casa, who developed GNOME Desktop, as one of the people who developed GNOME Desktop, partly as a reaction to what was going on in the KDE world and the licensing of Qt. And he's done all right for himself, hasn't he?
He has. Yeah, he works at Microsoft now.
Yeah. Oh, one other thing that I thought was funny in this article. The Qt license also doesn't allow free use of Qt, except under the X Windows system. People are starting to realize that X won't live forever.
Wow. 20
years ago.
Mind you, just to punctuate that point, Wayland is 10 years old now.
No.
Yeah.
Wow. It's old enough to play Fortnite.
Yeah, it is.
But, ironically, can't play
Can't
Fortnite.
play Fortnite.
Mark, step us up again, please.
Right, so I found some stories from 10 years ago because I remember that.
I hate you.
And 10 years ago in June, Firefox 3 was released, which was down... Yeah, think about that. And not only was it... Right, so this was Firefox version 3. Firefox version 1 came out 4 years before that. So they were releasing at the time a major version every 2 years.
What are we on now? Like Firefox 47,000?
4,005.
Yeah. So the release cadence of browsers has changed quite significantly since this. When it was released, there was a big sort of fanfare from Mozilla about this, and there was an estimated 8 million downloads in the first 24 hours,
that's pretty impressive.
Impressive.
Yeah, for back then in 10 years ago.
10 years ago,
Yeah.
2008.
It's not that good, really, is it? 10 years ago. People had iPhones 10 years ago.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they didn't have a lot of choice of browser. It was this time.
It was IE
it
or
was basically
Firefox.
IE or Firefox at this point.
Yeah.
So this was people who were making a choice about their browser.
Right,
Not
but they were
just-
making a choice because the alternative was rubbish. Right? That's why they were making that choice. Not
Yeah, I'm
because...
pretty sure in 2008 it was still IE6, which hadn't been updated for several
Right.
years. Yeah.
So this was people becoming educated about the fact that the browser you used was a choice.
Yes, and I remember working in corporate environments
Yeah.
around about that time. Before it was... what was it called before? It was Phoenix?
Firebird,
Firebird,
Phoenix.
Yeah.
One of those
Yeah.
5 different names
Yeah,
they couldn't
this was
get
before.
straight.
This was before. Yeah.
Mosaic.
Other
That was
interesting,
it.
other interesting things about Firefox. So it was the debut of the Awesome Bar, which was where they. So this is the
We don't
address
call it
bar
that anymore, do
the
we?
address bar where I still call it that. I think it's a cool name. This is the address bar where you
Millennial.
can type in and it will like search your history and your bookmarks and whatever else.
And give all your keyboard key presses to Google, right? Yes? Okay.
Possibly.
Right.
Well, Chrome doesn't do it in quite the same way, so I assume not. But who knows? No, because it doesn't necessarily search the web, but it searches so you can type in in your history, you can think, oh well, I was on this site and there was this word in that article, and
that's what I do.
And it'll
like
find
everyone
it.
else seems to tell me that I should use bookmarks, but I just type and let
exactly.
Google
You type,
find
it was
stuff for me.
on Reddit and it had this in the name, so you type reddit.com space and then the name that was in the title, and it finds it in your history. Perfect.
Yeah. So hands up, everyone here who maintains bookmarks still in their browser. Wow, weirdos.
That's
56?
around about half people.
60%?
yeah.
Yes.
At least half the people haven't moved on.
Yes, and
Wow.
so this was in June 2008. In June 2009, we saw the first Chrome developer preview released. So in between this, Chromium became available and buildable on Linux, but Chrome developer preview was the first official Google Chrome build available.
Yeah.
for
And
Linux.
now they are based. The basis of Chrome is now the number one selling laptops
yeah.
in 2018.
So that was 9 years it took for that to happen.
So total ascendancy in 10 years, because they're by far the largest browser market share in terms of just browsers on the desktop.
Right.
And then we think of Electron as well. Electron applications.
Got to get the Electron mention in.
I've got a pin and everything they gave me. But, that's the popular platform for developing desktop applications now, and that's based on Chromium and therefore Chrome.
Wow.
Yeah, and indeed mobile apps that are built with Cordova, PhoneGap. They're based on at least a WebKit environment, if not Chrome itself.
Although it is good to point out that at least WebKit did originate from KDE that we were talking about earlier.
KHTML.
Yeah, it's KHTML originally, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we have a couple of minutes just to sort of set the perspective. So Mark is now in 2008. We've brought you forward from 1978 to 2008. In 2008, Ubuntu Hardy Heron 804 was the current LTS, and it was running Linux kernel 2.624 and the GNOME 2.22 desktop.
So this was pre-Unity.
This is pre-Unity.
So that's when it looked just like Ubuntu Mate. Right?
It looks exactly like Ubuntu Mate.
But brown.
And it was the first release to feature Pulse Audio as the default audio subsystem.
People hated us for that,
Yeah,
didn't
yeah.
they? Yeah. Leonard!
The end of Ubuntu.
Yeah, it's the end
Yeah.
of Ubuntu.
But it was also the first release to feature the uncomplicated firewall, which I've loved ever since. For 10 years, I've loved that little firewall application. And it was also the first version to feature the Ubuntu Netbook edition.
I remember netbooks. I had a netbook.
Yeah. Well, and it goes on. So I pulled out some sort of top news from 2008. So other top news was the default file system was still...
Sorry, this is top technology news. I've just read some of these headlines.
Tech news. Top tech news. But also...
Rory Kethel-Jones wouldn't be reporting the following things.
well, he was a big fan of people in their bedrooms making Linux back then, wasn't
Right,
he?
yeah.
Yeah, but X3 was still the default, and Ted So was just testing X4 on his own laptop at the time, so it was just as X4 was becoming stable. Wine 1 was released. HD DVD lost the high-def format wars to Blu-ray in 2008. Netbooks were a success story.
For a bit.
That was that year.
Very
that year.
short-lived.
Yeah,
yes.
but they were a success. And ebook readers emerged in 2008. It was the year that everyone made ebook readers. Flexible displays were first prototyped and demonstrated in 2008 with the promise that they would be a real thing in 2011.
And then we had Bendgate.
Yeah.
A couple of years later.
Swimmers smashed world records at the 2008 Winter Olympics with the Speedo laser swimsuits, which are now banned from competitive competition. Do you not remember this?
No, I'm not a big swimmer.
They were designed around the skin surface of dolphins, and these swimmers all smashed seconds off Olympic world records and what have you. USB 3 was introduced in 2008.
10 years ago.
Still with a rubbish connector.
Yeah, and the smartphone wars were just around the corner as the Android G1 was launched.
Wow. Thank you for joining us on our trip through the time trumpet. I think we should probably move on. Joe.
Oh, all right. Oh, just
Can't get the
just
staff.
stop it when you like, Joe. It's all right.
Legal scratch.
So, those of you that came last year will remember that Alan set a challenge for Mark and I. And this year, I've decided to set a challenge for Alan and Mark.
Not because Martin was out the country and couldn't
This has
bother to do any
nothing
prep.
to do with the fact that I haven't been around for the last 2 weeks whatsoever. So it's something that we've discussed on the podcast a few times, which is the many ways that you can contribute to open source. And we talk the story, but the fact is, can we actually deliver on this? So I set out some rules here, and this was called Working Lunch Open Source Contributions. So the rules of the game are this. Set aside an hour or so a day to contribute to 2 open source projects. Spend up to 2.5 hours, well, more if you're really enjoying it, per project. Oh, hello. That's your daughter. Tell her the cookies are in the lower shelf of the fridge. Use your 2.5 hours over that week, or all at once if you like, and contribute however you see fit. For example, with code or documentation or bug triage, just examples. However, we are going to controversially veto one form of contribution, which is no bug reports, which we all actually believe in strongly, but we're going to rule that out as a means
because
of
we all do it
contributing.
already.
Well,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah,
but it also doesn't help that like we arrive and go, I'm here to help. Here are a bunch of bug reports.
Here's 2.5 hours of bug reports.
Yeah.
Thank you,
I'm
Stuart
helping.
Language. So, let's find out how Mark and Alan got on. So, first of all, Mark, what was the first project that you
My
decided?
first project was Drupal, the
Drupal.
content management system.
Okay.
Given you work on Moodle, this seemed like a logical.
Yes, so I work on Moodle, which is a PHP virtual learning environment web application, and Drupal is a PHP content management system.
Okay.
So it seemed like an easy thing for me to get into.
How'd you get started?
So first of all, I went to their website and I found they had a link for getting involved. So I had a look at that. They have a list of ways in which you can contribute. So I went for the development option because as a software developer, that seemed like the right thing to do. And then they had a page which was telling you how to set up your development environment. Now, the thing about looking at the documentation for how to contribute on Drupal is that there's lots and lots of lists which tell you lots of different ways that you can do things in different ways. So there are about 30 different ways to set up your development environment. So the first one I tried was downloading a config file for a system called Vagrant, which automatically sets up virtual machines. And I ran that, and just as happened every time I've tried to set up any development environment using a Vagrant file, it failed, and I couldn't work out why. And I wasn't going to spend my hour working out why this wouldn't work.
Totally committed to this task then.
No, so instead, I moved on to a different way of setting up my development environment, which I was more confident I'd be able to do in an hour.
Don't worry, you'll have an opportunity to go back in a minute.
Yeah. So I set up a local Apache MySQL PHP installation and got Drupal installed within an hour, just about. The following hours, I then spent actually contributing to the project. Now, I couldn't find any kind of list of, easy bugs for a new person to Drupal to get into. And Drupal is a massive system with lots of different components. So I found it kind of a bit daunting, and I just kind of panicked a bit when I just looked at this list of bugs. I thought, I don't know how I'm going to start doing this. So what I decided to do instead was code reviews. Because as well as there being bugs open for people to fix, there's bugs where people have submitted patches and the patches need reviews so they can then actually be sent for integration into the product. So I found 2 reviews which I could do. One of them was a config file for a tool called ESLint, which checks that your JavaScript style is correct. And basically the file had a load of 1s or 2s as to whether it would throw an error or a warning, and they decided that it would be better if it said error or warn so that you could understand it without having to refer to the ESLint documentation. So I reviewed that. That was easy. And the other thing was an update to some code documentation where someone had written a description of what a bit of code did, which was really, really hard to understand. So they rewrote it, and I reviewed what they'd rewritten.
And how easy was it to get involved in that? To go and get that code, review it, and then inform them that you had reviewed it and you were happy with it.
There was a page which had there were sort of 4 steps to go through when you're doing a review. You look at the patch, you make sure it makes sense, you apply the patch, you make sure it works, you make sure it does what it was meant to do, and then in the bug tracker you write a comment. It tells you what kind of things to say in your comment, and then you set the status to reviewed by the community.
And do they accept reviews from random Joe Nobody who just turns up and says, "Yeah, that looks good. Hey, whoop, bing"?
Yes, they do.
Wow. Okay.
But that's not it. That's not, I mean,
That's not the end of the process.
Exactly. The same thing happens with Moodle. There's a peer review process, and then there's an integration review process where the person who's actually managing the code base looks at it. But it has to have an initial, just sort of like someone who vaguely understands what's going on, looks at it and makes sure that it's okay.
Nice.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Alan, what was the first project you decided to contribute
So the first
to?
project I decided, we originally decided I was not allowed to contribute to Ubuntu.
Seems reasonable.
Yeah. So I chose Debian, which felt...
Naturally.
nearby and would help other people. And I had learned of a tool which looked really awesome for people who want to get involved in Debian, want to get involved in contributing. And it's called How Can I Help? And it's actually something you can install on your system. Apt install how-can-i-help. And once you've installed it, if you run How Can I Help, and also every time it gets updated when you apt upgrade, it spits out a list of calls to help, things you could do which would help the Debian project. And I thought, that's a good way for me to get started. I'll answer their call for help. So I ran How Can I Help? And the
I can see where this is going.
the list of things you could do are categorized. New packages where help is needed, including orphaned ones. New bugs suitable for new contributors. They're tagged newcomer. New bugs affecting Debian infrastructure. New packages removed from Debian testing. Maintainer might need help. New packages going to be removed from Debian. Maintainer might need help. Or new packages waiting for sponsorship. And I went through basically every single bug in the list, and I had no clue how to help. I am not a programmer, and I looked at all of these ways of contributing through this How Can I Help, and they were all, you need to adopt this package and take ownership of it because nobody else now
So a big
owns
commitment.
it.
This isn't a 2-hour thing.
This isn't a working lunch,
Yes.
right? This is a job,
Yes.
right? So I was a little bit frustrated at this and essentially gave up. I went through multiple times, over multiple lunchtimes, clicking through the bugs, reading them, and every so often I'd find a bug that said, yeah, I think this needs a significant time investment. I'll mark it newcomer, and somebody who comes along might be able to do it. And it might be, generally you would need to know whichever the individual product was, the individual application or deb, you would need to be fairly competent for that specific package to be able to contribute to any of these things. And I think it was really targeted at developers, like proper developers with a developer propeller hat on, not me, pretend developer, I play one on TV, right?
Play one on a podcast.
Yeah, exactly. So actually, I call that a write-off. I didn't actually get to contribute to Debian at all.
Okay, interesting. So before we move on to the other projects, Mark, if we may be so bold, do you have any feedback for Drupal as to how that process could have been improved in terms of how you got involved in what?
I think that there are two things I would say. Is one, have a clear list of bugs that would be good for new contributors who don't already know about the whole architecture of Drupal. And secondly, cut down on the lists in the documentation so that people have one way of setting up their development environment. And there's there's lots of other areas where you go onto a page of how to do this and there's 20, 30 things there. So cut down on the lists and have some clear paths in for new contributors.
Okay, and Alan?
How Can I Help should also have things that are not so developer focused. And I realize that's hard because when you think about what Debian is, it's a collection of other people's software mostly that's packaged by Debian developers. And I don't necessarily want to be a Debian developer. I want to help make it better. But I don't necessarily want to commit to being a DD.
But signposting documentation improvements that might have
That kind
been
of thing.
required.
Yeah,
confirming bugs and stuff like that. Yeah.
Drupal has a lot of things like that. Like one of the things they say is add tags to our documentation as a really lightweight new thing you can do. So yeah, there's definitely things that even though it's a development project, there's definitely a lot of things that you can do that aren't development focused.
Okay, so moving on, Mark, what was the second project that you decided to contribute to?
So for the second project, I wanted to go for something which wasn't a massive system with loads and loads of contributors. I wanted to try and go for a smaller project. And by chance, I've been playing around with KDE and I stumbled across the active window control widget.
What does that do?
Which is something you put in your panel and it shows the close, maximize, minimize buttons in the panel instead of in the window.
Ah, right. Yes.
Right, so I was...
Like Unity.
Yes, exactly like Unity.
Like Marto window app is what you actually want.
So I was looking at this and I noticed some comments in the comments thread on KDE Store, which is where you download new widgets from, saying that the version in KDE Store wasn't the latest version and you had to go here and build it yourself if you want the latest version. So I followed the link and it went to a system called Fabricator, spelled with a PH, which looks a bit like kind of Launchpad and GitHub and GitLab and that sort of thing for hosting and managing your code. But basically all of the KDE stuff appears to be on an instance of Fabricator. So I managed to find the Git repository and download the code, and then I found the install file and ran the commands, and I got a load of things about saying, oh, we can't find this thing which apparently you need but you haven't been told. So I spent probably about an hour going through, running and googling and finding the right answer on the internet for each of these errors and what it meant I had to install first. So I decided that my contribution was going to be I would update the install file saying, before you run this command, install all of these packages. So I updated the install file. I then had to find out how to contribute this back, which it turns out is a bit of an unusual process on Fabricator compared to what I've used on other systems. So instead of...
I love the face you pull every time you say Fabricator.
Fabricator, yes.
Rewind the video. If you're watching the video, you need to rewind.
I feel the PH needs extra emphasis.
It does sound like something my daughter would have named.
Yes. So what you do on Fabricator is instead of making a Git thing somewhere and to pushing a Git repository and then asking for it to be pulled into the main Git repository, you go to a form and it says paste your diff in here or upload it here. So you have to make a patch and then you have to stick that in a web form and then you submit that and then it says, okay, now describe what it's doing. So then you're kind of making a bug report and telling it which project it's linked to, and then you have to tell who you need to review it. So I had to look in the Git history and work out who was the most active contributor and then
tag him.
Yeah, that's basically what I did. And so it's now sitting for review. Hopefully it'll get reviewed.
I've already forgotten why you were doing this.
So that I could build the latest version of Active Window Control Widget.
Why did you need the latest version?
Because it said that it fixed a bug, which it didn't.
Brilliant. Okay.
So that was my adventures in KDE.
Alan, what was your second project you chose to...
KDE.
Oh. Everyone's doing it, apparently.
Yeah. So I did a search on the KDE bug tracker. I thought I'd try and triage or confirm some new bugs. I thought, that's an easy thing.
Were you also searching in Fabricator?
No, I wasn't using Fabricator. So what I decided to do was just go to the KDE bug tracker, just do Google search KDE bug tracker, and just looked for bugs that looked like they were non-confirmed. And I found one that was to do with KDE Connect. And I thought, I'm running KDE Connect on my laptop and I've got it on my phone. I'll have a go at that. So I looked at that bug and...
I can see where this is going as well.
And it said, you need to update KDE Connect on your phone to the beta version. So I did that. And I had to opt in.
How?
You opt in on the Google Play Store to the betas.
Right. The client
And then
side,
I tried sending a file. The problem was, the bug was, you can't send a file from your phone to your laptop, right? Yep. So I tried reproducing it, and sure enough, it failed for me too. I tried reverting the beta to go back to the stable version, and I tried all kinds of other things. And that took me about 20 minutes. And at the end of it, I wrote a comment that said, yep, I've reproduced that. And here's a screenshot of the problem. And later on, I had a follow-up from whoever is the maintainer asking further questions. And so actually, it looked like a useful thing because the person who originally filed the bug, it looks like English wasn't his first language because it was a bit garbled, the bug report. So I think I helped there.
Yes.
Great.
In 20 minutes.
So what did you do with your other hour and 40 minutes?
I spent way more than an hour and 40 minutes because I was trying to make up for my failure with Debian. So some bugs were just unreproducible by the original bug author. Here's a crash, but I don't know what happened and I can't reproduce it. So I thought, well, I'm not going to have any luck there.
Every Launchpad bug ever.
Yeah. Quite a few of those. I found one where it said... they're having a problem dragging a window to another monitor, and at the time I was sat on a train. I didn't have another monitor with me, so I thought, okay, I'll mark that one to have a look at later. I never got back to it. Then I looked at one that said something about if you enable this plasmoid, this thing happens. I don't know what a plasmoid is. So I had to Google what is a plasmoid.
It sounds like it needs to be surgically removed.
Right. I spent 10 minutes trying to install this widget thing. I uninstalled it, installed it, couldn't. And no matter what I did, the widget wouldn't appear on the list of things I could do. And I gave up in frustration again because I got really annoyed that I couldn't actually even get to the point that the guy was trying to get to make the thing work, let alone make it break. So that annoyed me. And that was 40 minutes, right? I then thought the next day, so this is Tuesday, 8:15. Dude, I've got all week here.
We have 3 minutes left.
8:15. I thought I'll take another tack. I googled for contribute to KDE. I thought maybe I should have done this yesterday, but no. And I found a website, and it was called community.kde.org. Get involved, and it turns out I'm doing the right thing. One of the things was go through and triage existing bugs. Leave comments, screenshots, make sure they're good quality bug reports. I got a reply to my KDE Connect bug. Further on, replied to that. 20 minutes spent there. Then I thought, I've got another way I can contribute to KDE. I wrote a blog post. I reviewed the KDE Slimbook laptop.
Oh, my goodness.
That took me an hour. I got retweeted by the KDE community Twitter account.
It did.
I think that's valid. And then I found myself repeatedly going back to the KDE bug tracker whenever I got a spare moment and having a look for them. And actually, it's quite a pleasant experience. So there's a nice URL listed from their Get Involved page, which tells you how to get to unconfirmed new bugs in chronological order. Super easy to just go through them one by one, find ones that I could maybe reproduce and actually help. So yeah, I found that quite useful, and I will probably carry on doing that.
Awesome.
Brilliant. So quite a lot of frustration and anger from your point of view, but also some productive outcome. You found your niche, I think, with KDE. You found a way that you
get
could
someone
contribute.
to send me a laptop. Well, step one. No, but yeah, the bug reporting stuff and triaging other people's bugs and helping the developers know that actually, this is an issue and here's the version it happens. Because some of them, the bug reports were just this thing crashed, I don't know what, and I'm on KDE whatever. I actually added a bit of detail. So I felt that was useful.
Taking these projects and just ignoring the projects for the moment, it sounds like actually contributing to open source is hard.
If you're not a developer, it turns out it is quite hard.
Yeah.
And all those times I've told people you should get contributed,
yeah.
I feel a bit bad now.
Yeah. Well, and so we've learned something from that. So,
fortunately, I'm a developer, so it was really easy for me.
Yeah, but I can appreciate why it would not be easy for myself to contribute to some particular areas of the things that I know about. If I went to a different project like GNOME, I think I would struggle in similar ways. So maybe not these projects in particular, but we need better signposting and instructions and documentation on how to actually get over the threshold and to find ways to contribute that are not just developer focused.
I'd be interested to hear from our listeners if they've tried contributing to something new that they haven't touched before. Send us an email, show@ubuntupodcast.org. Let us know how that got on.
Yeah, and if they haven't tried before, give it a try and then send us their feedback. Okay, Samantha. And just like that, 45 German minutes are over.
Thanks everyone for coming.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
It's very good of you to join me in the time trumpet and listen to us witter on about how terrible I am at contributing to open source.
Enjoy the rest of the evening and
Yes.
the rest of the podcasts. We still have 2 shows to come.
Yeah.
We have one of them, which is called Linux Voice, and then we have the Drunken Mashup at the end.
Yep. But now is the time to go upstairs and order your food.
Yes. Bye.
Thanks so
Bye-bye.
much. Bye.
You're welcome.